Yeah, welcome to the last round of NOVED, everybody. Judging with me in order of type is Fransiska
Hi everyone, best of luck.
and Marcell.
Hello everyone, best of luck.
All right. Yeah. Thank you everybody for the speaking order and also the consent. But yeah, just a few several housekeeping rules. Remember to state your POI preferences and also your gender pronouns if you want to before your speech. POI is between 1 minute and 6 minutes of the speeches. But yeah, I think we can just start the debate. Under the motion, this House opposes the dominant narrative that one must always prioritize self-love. Let's welcome the Prime Minister to the floor. Here.
Raka, sorry, do you consent to be recorded?
Yes.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, Prime Minister, you may take the floor.
Hi guys, am I audible?
Audible.
All right. Pronounce the MPI chat box. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I have 3 important setup before going to my argumentation. Firstly, how it forms, how this narrative going to look like and our current status quo. I think for example, the narrative that, oh, I choose peace, I choose myself, and I choose whatever that I love in the very first place, rather than anything else. It is something that manifests into like, oh, more videos on TikTok or more people talking about this, or more influencers say that it is something that you need to prioritize and whatnot. But second of all, what is the dominant even mean? I feel like the idea of dominant should be characterized of something that overly glorified. It is the narrative that overly prioritize rather than talking about other narrative, means also the discussion will be like so enough strong to conquer this narrative that you need to choose yourself and also choose your happiness, because this narrative is too strong, because too many like supporters or too many people talking about this as an echo chamber and whatnot. But it is also like entering the relationship. If you want to enter the relationship, what you think is gonna be the best thing and also the best matrix that you need to understand is, oh, what I can get from this relationship. But it is also looks like the narrative when humans generally have like egoistic things and whatnot. But third of all, I think that it gets to a point when people learning to like isolate themselves when I do not interact anymore with others, because people can hurt me and I choose my happiness because it is the easiest way for you in order to prioritize yourself. It's by is isolating yourself from others, because probably others have the same interest like you, which is prioritizing themselves. I do also agree that it's not the only way for you in order to prioritize your happiness. You can still also prioritize your happiness through like play to your with your friends, go out and whatever. But this is something that also can visualize why how people internalize this narrative. But thirdly, what is it is something that going to be dominant to begin with. I think it is because human inherently are selfish and also like seeing something on whether or not it is benefiting them or not at the end of the day. Several argumentation in my speech. Firstly, the idea of love and also sacrifice. I think that sacrifice is something that necessary in this world, because when you sacrifice something, for example, you feeling something that better at the end of the day. It is includes in terms of context like families, like your parents to you or your parents, and also datings and whatnot. There will be like always opportunity cost when we're talking about relationship. For example, you know that love is something that good because you know that other people sacrifice something for you. This is makes you understand that that kind of love coming from purity, not it is something that egoistic and whatnot. You feel someone loving you as because they really love you and whatever. But second of all, it changes on how people socialize at the end of the day. Sure, opposition might argue that it is not always about isolation, like what I said in my setup, but it is like we're talking about the intention on how people interact with other. What are you doing and whatever? Because when you're playing with your with your friends, for example, it's not because like you do really like miss them and whatnot. but because that you care about your fulfillment of emotion, you care about what you can get from them and whatever. Sure, you play with them, but it is not sustainable emotional bond because it is depend on emotional fulfillment that you can get from your friends and also benefit that you can get from your friend. But sadly, it is not the best way for you to having a bond or having a support system because other people might not always have power to give you what you want. Maybe they have certain types of like emotion roller coaster for themselves, but it makes you to understand that even like your friends want to like chit chat with you to share their story, to share their sadness, you're not going to prioritize them anymore. But why sacrifices is something that really important. When you're feeling good is when you feel like you can sacrifice something at the end of the day. Like I join NOVED and I feel good. It's not because I always be in the first rank in every round in NOVED, but I feel good because I feel fulfilled because I sacrifice myself, sacrifice my weekend to collaborate with Kak Deborah because this is might be the last time Kak Deborah able to join NOVED. This is how it's gonna be look like at the end of the day, right? Under your side of the house, everyone do things because to feel their ego. Because if you sacrifice something, it is not an act of self-love at the end of the day. It is possible for you to interact with it is really possible with this narrative interact with the other dominant narrative that currently happening, which is the liberty of individualistic and also individualization. This means the value that current situation exists and how people interpret this narrative, it's not going to be in altruistic way, but rather it is something that going to be like really self-centered way at the end of the day. But why it is something that better under our side of the house in terms of fulfillment of human experience? I believe this is a biggest tipping point because it is more like the value of what is the characterization and also parameter for you to be a human being at the end of the day and why you can fulfill those kind of things in OG. I believe that you're not gonna be open to newer people on with the existence of this dominant narrative. Why so? Because self-love means every human like comfort, like because that's a normal of human being. You're not going to open to new people because interaction might be makes you feel uncomfortable with new people that you do not know. Why interaction is something that important? Because human experience not only do something like you like, for example, but it is also faces, loses, and wins in any relationship, and you conquer all of those things as possible at the end of the day. That's why having new interaction with new people, it is not important whether the quality is good or not. It still gives you the meaning of true life at the end of the day. Comparatively, on the opposition side, the idea of happiness that might be happen under the side of the house, and the matrix is the illusion to your own happiness because you normalize yourself being yourself and also self-centered. But sadly, it is not something that always possible to do in the current status quo in realistic world because no matter what happened, you would always interact with people. What is the bad side of this? People would like so easily feel unhappy because at the end of the day, they cannot fulfill those kind of parameters to be happy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for the speech. Let's welcome the Leader of Opposition to the floor. Here.
Check, am I audible?
Yes, audible.
1 second, sorry about my timer. For POI, just drop it in the chat box and then accept one from closing for crossbench. Yeah. None of the thing I say in this debate represent my personal values, just for the purpose of this debate. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. The first piece of contextualization I want to give in opening government is to explain how does the dominant narrative gonna look like inside society. It's like number one, there will be narrative around you in every single platform saying that you should focus on self-love, that your personal happiness matters the most, and individual happiness outweighs like the relationship between other human and whatsoever. But it does not necessarily mean people will stop interacting with each other, because I think OG also agreed we are social beings. I'm going to maximize how does the interaction gonna look like. But secondly, I think it most importantly liberates people from toxic expectations, because now you can no longer be manipulated due to you having self-love. But the next contribution is going to explain how do people actually self-love. I'm going to mechanize this. I think the self-love looks like how your worth is now affirmed by inherent value that is attached to you. Why is that so? Because as an individual, you know yourself the best. You know all of the bad things within you and whatsoever. So the way how you value yourself cannot be based on external metric like how much wealth you own, how good of an individual you are, because you actually understand that there are many bad traits inside yourself that can outweigh all of these good things, especially with the trait that human tends to be pessimistic and whatsoever. So it means that the prerequisite of you to self-love is to accept all of the bad traits you have in your life, is to accept that all of those values do exist, but you still want to love yourself because of the inherent value that makes you you. That's basically how self-love exists. But I'm going to mechanize to you why is it going to be accessible to every single individual. Because I think the core value of self-love is about valuing yourself. It's about setting boundaries and also knowing your worth. And it costs nothing for individuals to do such things. Uh, so I think it's going to be very, very accessible. But secondly, there are also many more avenues to express this, especially with the dominant narrative. There are things like social media, public campaigns, and everything that shows you about concept of self-love, how it's now a common knowledge that makes it far more accessible for many people. But most importantly, I think for people who are very, very disenfranchised, minority and marginalized group, I think they have continuously fight and they have existed surviving and everything because they love themselves, because everyone hates them but they can still survive because they love them. So I don't want any team to say that self-love is inaccessible. I'm already proved to you why it's going to be accessible to every single individual. There's going to be two big contributions in my speech. First is talking about the internal validation, but secondly about interpersonal relationship. First, you get internal validation. I think the context of status quo right now that are very important to be noticed is that there is constant comparison that are very, very prone to happen with us, especially with social media, with capitalism that only highlight the good side of every single individual, where people can choose which side they want to show to public or not. It makes people measure self-worth based on external metrics like how much money you own, how much achievement you own, and etc. The problem with human is that I think human will always feel not enough by this specific reason that you always compare yourself to other individuals. The moment you are able to self-love, the implication is that you internally feel more secure, because regardless of how good people might be, how excellent your brother or your sister actually are, you do not care, because you internally will still love you exactly because you know all of the positive trait and negative trait that makes you you. You are less likely to be burned out with all of this constant exposure to the high standard and all of those reasons. So it means that the prerequisite of you to survive with this high and uh, constant interaction with all of this high level standard is when you are able to love yourself, and we have proven to you on how it's going to be successful to maximize your productivity by not being able to burn out and feel so much pressure whatsoever. We just want to flag out that things like but I just want to frame this argument. Why is it independently beginning? Because I'm going to argue to you that this is the most certain argument in this debate, because it doesn't correlate to how people act to you, but it's about your internal self in and of itself, about how you perceive your initial value as an individual. Insofar as to prove to you that self-love is accessible to all individuals, hence the internal validation becomes an argument that is certain to every single human being that are unique on our side of the house. But second argument regarding interpersonal relationships can engage massively to many cases OG talked about. Argue to you that the prerequisite of creating a meaningful relationship is when you actually love yourself. Why is that so? Because absent self-love, relationships are built to give you validation from other individual. Because arguably love is a basic need for every single human being, and when you cannot provide it on your own, you seek for other people to provide it to you. This becomes problematic as the relationship on their side of the house are built based on both party tries to seek love from each other. This exactly becomes bad because I think people have conditionality. They might not be able to fulfill your expectation of love. I think firstly, not everyone can access true love, like having partners and everything, because like there are things like birth lottery that makes you unattractive to some individuals per se. But even if you have the capacity to find a partner who loves you, for example, sometimes they have different priorities in life, right? And this kind of thing, you can never fulfill your expectation that always rise as you like grow older. For example, the people's affection people love is something that are finite. It means that for you to expect love coming from other individuals is a very harmful concept because you can never satisfy the needs of love that an individual could see. It means that most likely than not, people are gonna manifest it. It's gonna manifest it into things that are toxic. It looks like how you become manipulative to your partner or you exploit your partner because you expect such love to exist to you. It means that the relationship becomes significantly less meaningful on the top of the house the moment they cannot love themselves. But second and most importantly, the moment this dominant narrative exists, it also disallows you from exploitation and manipulation coming from other individuals. Why is that so? Because you know what you deserve as an individual. You know that you do not deserve to be treated that badly by your significant other, for example. This could only happen when you love yourself first before it becomes exclusively important that the prerequisite of you having a meaningful relationship is when you already love yourself. I'm gonna engage to the thing they said that, we will feel love. And feeling love feels good because you sacrifice something. I think that the first thing I just want to clear up is that on either side of the house, you would still interact with other individuals because like you still need to make connection in life, you still need people to work together with, you still need to build family and whatsoever. So I think that people still interact to an extent, but the delta lies upon the reasoning behind that relationship was built from the get-go. I'm gonna argue to you that you're actually gonna feel more love on our side of the house. Why is that so? Because the sacrifices your significant other made when they love you is bigger because it's no longer coercive. Like, for example, your family relationship, then they will automatically love you regardless of how good yourself or not. But it's a voluntary action because your significant other, your family can always choose to love themselves first, prioritize their self love. But the fact that they choose you, that they want to prioritize other individual, means that they really, really love you. So the feeling of love are far bigger than ours of the house. I think that the incentive to do this do exist because humans still want partners, humans still want to make meaningful connection, and that's why you're gonna feel love way, way better than the rest of the house. Very, very proud.
Thank you very much, the Leader of Opposition, for that speech. Let's welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Hi, just checking. Am I audible?
Audible.
All right, great. Wait. Okay. Right. Starting my speech. Oh yeah, POIs, raise your hand. I'll try to take one from closing for crossbench. Tapi kalau opening juga nggak apa-apa. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Notice that OO's case can only run on two metrics. By one, is it true that self-love is accessible for everyone, not only the concept, but the action of involving in choosing yourself? Because this narrative is not only, oh, you need to love yourself, but you need to prioritize yourself to prove that you love yourself, right? It manifests in different ways, but I think mostly like it manifests in that you need to choose your peace. You need to leave things that doesn't serve you. So if you don't leave that thing, you're not loving yourself. It's not just a simple concept, but it's an action that you're taking rather than just some kind of narrative that exists. So is it true that it's accessible? But also, their case is also, secondly, it's contingent on the fact whether it's true, are you not able to satisfy others' expectations of you earning? As long as you can prove that to you, I think that one, it proves that their case is no longer like significant towards this debate, but also two, it proves to you why self-love itself is a narrative idea, especially put in a dominant place. But several clarifications before moving on to the responses, right? So first, I think just like what Raka said, this is like a dominant narrative that you need to think of. So like even LO's argument on saying that right now you're able to feel more love because there are bigger sacrifices, it's probably never gonna happen because no one's gonna will to sacrifice themselves for you. Because the idea is that you need to choose yourself. The idea is that you need to choose what serves you. You need to choose what makes you feel love. So why would you sacrifice, even if it's just on the concept of sacrificing, not an actual action to do it? I'm pretty sure it wouldn't happen at the very first place. But also second, just another clarification. I think if it's on the context of like talking about how big this narrative is, just to stands like what Raka has already mentioned, I'm pretty sure the main idea that we want to touch on more is how this narrative exists not only in layers of society, but also it exists in like media, it exists in like books, it exists in like daily conversations of people, which leads to it being commodified. Because the action of self-love now is not only a narrative that's like, oh yeah, like what LO said, that you need to love all the bad things in your life, which probably is not gonna happen, response later. But second, it is commodified by companies, it's commodified by the media, right? Because they try to push this idea because it's something that can easily be capitalized. Like, hello, like easily, like people telling women that if you love yourself and you want to care for yourself, you need to do this 20-step skincare. Like, it's very easily capitalized, and I'm pretty sure that's what already happening in status quo, is that there is also a commodification of what the action of self-love is. But even if it's not commodified to that extreme, we would say that media constantly feeds you the idea of like not only what self-love is, so like not only that you need to leave things that doesn't serve you, you need to get away from your friends who don't want to spend like 24/7 with you because they probably don't love you as much as you do. But I think it also exists in like simple narratives of what love should look like between you and between like other people, and how to engage with that. So okay, moving on first. I think first on the topic that you can define what self-love is, and you can define how it engage with others, because you know yourself the best, so your trait of love cannot be explained by external ideas. I would say that this argument would work probably in like the last like 100 decades, but I think in the current status quo of what the world we live in, this argument just simply doesn't work like that. I think with the capitalization of everything, and also just the constant idea and debating on like what your life should look like, love is something that has been constantly attacked on and constantly being defined as what it looks like. I think it's not only talking about self-love, but generally like relationships. Like, you know, the narrative that, oh, a good partner is like the partner who would like sacrifice everything for you. Or maybe like the idea of that, oh, if you want to have like a good life, if you want to have good parents are the type of people that are always constantly being there for you, and such things like that. I'm pretty sure also the definition of love that you have right now in your mind, it's not something that you created yourself, but probably passed down by your parents, passed down by your school teachers, passed down by people from your generations. But sure, maybe to some extent you still have some agency to define what love is for you, because you have fulfilled the human experience. But just because you can define what love is for you, does that mean you are free from the external perceptions of what people think love should look like? I don't think so, especially in a dominant narrative. Like I said before, this dominant narrative not only enforces you to self-love, but also put that action of self-love into something strong. Like, I think it also can correlate to the context of like LO saying that you set boundaries, you know when to leave like toxic relationships. But we argue that it wouldn't be as simple as what they try to perceive, or like it wouldn't be as good as what they mentioned. Because why? First, I think just talking on the basis of accessibility of it. Is it true that it's accessible for everyone to define what love is for themselves? Well, no, but let's be charitable. It might be that you can define what love is. Is it true that everyone can access this to actually act on it? I think it's just simple as me having like, let's say I have a couple, a partner, right? And maybe I really want to build a life with my partner. Maybe that is my definition of self-love, that I really want to indulge in like the good things in life with this partner. But I physically cannot do that because yeah, society and also other narratives still exist that I cannot do that. I think this also speaks to a lot of people, such as marginalized people, like maybe the backbone of a family, like a person who simply like works the job to like constantly work for like their parents and such things like that. If we're talking about the idea of self-love, probably that person don't want to do that, right? They don't want to go like going as like an online driver, or they don't want to spend their lives working just to physically pay for their parents. But are they able to leave that decision? I don't think so. I think like in several like contexts, this specifically harms marginalized people, because this kind of narrative, it asks you to choose yourself, but it also punishes you if you are not able to choose yourself, because it's so dominant. Because the idea is that, oh, if you don't into this narrative, then probably you're the type of people who like to trample on other people, because you don't want people to be aware of what they're choosing, right? So I think this is what matters now, because that accessibility is not as good as what is promised. But also then the last part, I think generally about social interaction, because there's also been a contention here. I try to argue that people still will interact, but Raka has mentioned what is the intention behind these interactions? I think it matters, right? Because if I interact with other people just on the basis that, oh, it fulfills me, then it's easier for me to let go of my relationships because there is no certain emotional bound that I have to relationships. I think this also speaks in terms of like social movements. It also speaks like the reason feminism can happen is not because there was one person who suddenly thinks that, oh, I want to set boundaries. Sure, but it also happens because multiple women think that we shouldn't let our happiness be on the sacrifice of other women. Women of whites thinking towards a woman of color. So what else we proven here? I think we proved to you that one, if it's self-love is not accessible, then the best thing you can do is think about others, proud to open.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for that speech. Let's welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition to close the opening debate. Hear him.
Hello, am I audible?
Kak, I'm so sorry, my teammates ketendang, jadi kayak can we wait dulu? Maaf banget, Kak.
Oh yeah, no worries. Yeah, we'll wait for a few minutes.
Oke.
Aman kak, udah masuk lagi kok, aman.
Oh, udah ya. Okay, cool. Alright, Deputy Leader of Opposition, you can take the floor again.
Right. Test. Good. If like suddenly my voice is gone, please let me know. Also POI through chat. Yeah. Hold on. Timeline. Right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Opening government's case in regards towards accessibility of self-love could be dismissed because we will going to argue to you that people don't have access to self-love in status quo because they don't know that self-love is a choice, because self-love is heavily stigmatized. It is said that you don't have to love yourself, that you need to prioritize other people first. That makes you a virtuous person. If we can debunk to you why self-love why the dominant narration of self-love is going to be a good approach given the status quo and how the realistically like how the world is going on right now, we basically win this debate. Second of all, in regards towards people sacrificing, I don't think that this is a valid concern. At the end of the day, sacrificing is still going to happen in our side of the house. We just sacrifice better because now if you want to sacrifice, you are making yourself as one of the deciding variable. If you want to sacrifice yourself to love other people, for example, you will rethink to yourself, what do I sacrifice? Is there certain part of myself that I don't love, or like certain part of myself that I let go, or certain part of myself that I hate because I love this person? You are going to be more decisive. You're going to be more evaluative of which kind of person you want to commit to. Third thing is like they want to argue in regards towards commodification. We think that this is too extreme because eventually, sure, there are 20-step Korean whatever skincare and whatever. We think that the harm is not that significant. Even if there are commodification, however, things like self-help book, we're so good with that because eventually we're trying to promote the self-helpness as one of the most important thing that every single person should have. My extension will explore in regards towards the idea why this is the only narrative to face the current social structure. I'm going to give you 2 layers. Firstly, why this is very important eventually, because there are cultural structure that is entangled within us in our daily basis. Second of all, why is this very important realistically speaking given the world that we live in right now? First, let's try to analyze in regards towards the cultural aspect, right? This narrative is very, very important because this narrative impacting towards a very sensitive certain amount of people. How does it look like? First thing first, maybe it looks like us, like Southeast Asian people that have the culture that focuses on Rimo or like Gotong Royong or Musyawarah, for example, that basically tells you that you need to prioritize yourself, your family, your elders, your mom and dad, your brother before yourself in order for you to become virtuous. Second of all, it looks like a woman, for example, needs to be selfless, needs to always prioritize their child before themselves. Everyone congratulates their baby before the mother when the mother is when mother is going to labor, for example. Third of all, society culture looks like having a selflessness as a virtue means that you're superior. If you don't prioritize yourself, your worth is equal to your sacrifice. I'm going to tell you why this is bad under 2 reasons. First thing first, this is bad because it's already innate toward our societal structure, and we see this in every day. Like you already see how mothers basically needs to put their children first. This translate to becoming more people-pleasing behavior. In our side of the house, you already see realistically speaking that people loses the agency, that people loses the grip on themselves, on what kind of value that they love from themselves, because they need to prioritize other people first. Second of all, at the end of the day, this is really bad because eventually you are sacrificing other things before having yourself as one of the deciding variable. It looks like you are sacrificing your time, you're sacrificing your effort, you're sacrificing all of your money, for example, to other people that you think is worth it. But eventually, when you reevaluate, you lose yourself when you are loving other people. The implication is very, very important because at the end of the day, we are having some agency, at least towards these people that have already grown towards this massive cultural structure. At the end of the day, it looks like mothers, for example, having a grip on herself, that she also needs certain time for wellness. She also needs certain time for herself in order to process all of the feeling of transitioning towards becoming a mother, for example. It looks like a woman that lives in a patriarchal structure in Southeast Asia, loving themselves more, thinking themselves that they are pretty and whatsoever, and not being insecure within themselves. Eventually, this builds a better relationship in our side of the house. The moment that people understand that there's a certain part of themselves that needs love towards themselves, meaning that they cannot be insecure. So eventually, when you're inside of a relationship, you are not insecure with your partner. You are more done with yourself, and eventually this will foster a more stable relationship in the long term. Second layer of this analysis is why this is the most realistic approach that we have in the status quo. I'm going to tell you that seeing people yeah, sure. Yeah.
So logically, that means that sacrifices are gonna happen anyway. But in your side, the sacrifices are not accounted because it's seen as an act of choosing yourself still at the end of the day. So how does that can correlate with your argument before?
No, we're saying right now, when people are sacrificing, they think always in the other person's point of view. What matters for happiness in other person's point of view. In our side, when you're sacrificing, you take yourself as one of the deciding variable. What makes you happy, not only the other person's happiness. So that is why sacrificing is better, because the person that is worth sacrificing is the person that is worth your self-love and also your time. But second of all, I'm going to tell you why this is the most important thing in the current social structure. Because right now, you see people on LinkedIn, for example, posting jobs basically you never get interview for, and there are a lot of beauty expectation from Korean, K-pop, social media, constant exposure, and whatsoever. So the world is already full of egoistic, individualistic people that constantly harm our self-worth. In our side, at least when you have self-belief, you have reluctance to constantly jump into conclusion that you are inferior. You'll see yourself, evaluate yourself, and have a growth mindset, because now self-love is something that is more expanded. It's branding as something that is good to have. Second of all, in our side, you are more open to possibilities. This is true because self-love is partly loving yourself and loving your flaws, but in a subtle way. You don't self-sabotage yourself whenever you are sad, or whenever you lose a debate round, for example. You will love your flaw. You will understand that there are certain limitations that a person can have, so that you could evaluate for the better. So in comparative, in our side of the house, this growth mindset is going to be catalyzed. If they are prideful, if they are egoistic, then so be it, because that is the fruit of their achievement, and these are all the benefits that are not going to happen in government side. So eventually, this is the most suitable narrative we have. This is better off. Very proud.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leader of Opposition. Moving on to the closing half of the debate, let's welcome Member of Government. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Audible.
Okay, thank you. If you want to PLI, just raise your hands or do it in chat. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. This debate is not about either life is supposed to be happy or not, or that anyone can in the end achieve happiness or not. Why? Because they're all different. What opening bench did was generalizing that everyone must get happiness regardless of how they want, or like they should not get happiness and they should sacrifice each other. It's not important. What is important in this kind of motion is that how does this narrative actually look like and interact to people under grassroots to make sure that if we analyze that it's something bad impacting the people, we win. And that's exactly how CG is going to differentiate from OG. So I'm going to explain the biggest context that opening batch never actually talks about, which is how does this narrative interact, right? 4 points. 1, how does it actually look like in the status quo? It says that the dominant narrative, meaning that in social media right now, which is the reach is worldwide, meaning the strangers from different continents is telling other strangers in different continent and different situation on how they should prioritize their love. Dominant here, meaning that every content like this is flooding the algorithm. Why? Because it feels so good to watch this kind of contents and discourses. You will feel peace and nostalgic, meaning your FYP will be filled by this kind of content. So now, what kind of content am I actually talking about, right? The content that's, it's not like, hey, you know what, you should find solace in God. No, it's not like that, like what opposition try to claim. But the trap is that it will show something like this. I'm pretty sure you've seen it. Like, take that trip with your friends at 20. Money will come back, age will not. Or like, hey, hello, welcome to my channel. Let's paint nail for my next 20 minutes. Or like, please watch F1 in Singapore while you're young. Your parents don't care. At least you have some fun. That kind of content is actually happening in social media. And that's the content that's likely to flood this algorithm, because when you feel that, you have the dopamine level increasing, which makes you feel interested, because no one is gonna interested in watching someone preaching about how they find solace in God. And that's like what opposition tried to claim internal happiness, right? So it doesn't really matter. That's how the context of the dominant narrative is actually look like in social media. Secondly, who is the actor inside this narrative, right? The spreader, which is the industry that benefits from entertainment, i.e. karaoke, Disneyland, clubbing, other entertainment like concert or content creator. Why? Because they fill you up with fantasies and promising you that you can get happiness if you do exactly what they tell you. And they charge such a high price for it to make sure they get money from engagement and the price that you purchase their services, right? But who will be receiving this kind of message? The people that consume media, most likely Gen Z or younger, usually sandwich generation, have heart life, mental health issue, for example. So they tend to take anything literally, right? So they don't digest the information and take it only for the good side, but they take it literally. How do you know that? Because now you know there are a lot of bocil Timothy Ronald asking like, what McLaren lu warna apa bos? All the time to economics professor claiming that they're not rich. So you have to understand this is the kind of content that consumes social media. So how do we oppose it? This is the third point in CG. We want the narrative to be balanced. What CG wants is that we don't want to talk about either life is supposed to be happy or not. I think every sane person in Earth have incentive to be happy in the very end of the day. But I want to talk about the reality, about how the narrative actually works, about the reality, not the concept. We do not need to prove either people are going to be happy or not. What we have to prove is that if insofar this narrative is happening and is something bad, you already win. Fourth point, how does this narrative manifest, right? I have already proven to you the impact of social media is really big. So there are two things. One, you will only care about yourself, which means you will go to that trip solo with, saying, Apichi, wish I could travel the world or something like that, and leave your parents to follow the American dream, for example. Or you will go clubbing with your friends instead of studying because you feel like, it's too hard, I deserve happiness, right? And secondly, I just don't like what OG said about how they will have the incentive to help because it gives you betterment, right? I feel like when you help only because you feel happy, you won't help the others that are really in need. You won't spend your capital to help every other person. So I'm going to prove why it's gonna defeat the whole purpose of social movement. So that's the context that we're playing in. Now that I've finished talking about the context of how the narrative works, I'm going to move on to 2 points later and to raise hand. Secondly, now moving on to the extension. 1, how it will create consumerism trapped by these industries, right? Who will be benefited from all of this content? 1, theme park. Secondly, tourism spot. How they make your feelings attached to them. Or like, for example, fast food in your ad commercial of Burger King, you said that eating Whopper is happiness. So they take away all of your money and still give you happiness only for a little while. And based on dopamine domino, which means that every time you do those kind of things, you will need more dopamine later on in the future to make sure that you feel happy. So it means that you will never feel enough. You will run out your money and still won't be happy because you're trapped in this consumerism trap. But secondly, on how it will defeat the whole purpose of social movement. But before that,
Your case only applies to rich people. Average people won't take those reckless trips to F1 Singapore, so your case is not realistic. In our case, it's more realistic because growth mindset is for everyone.
I don't care. Once again, I've already contextualized how these industries and how social media contents are literally taken literal by all of this bocilti motironal. And insofar you never actually managed to prove who will be the receiver, I don't think you have a say in this. But secondly, I'm going to actually explain how this will work in social media, in social movement. I'm sorry. I think the reason why majorities keep on oppressing minorities is because you feel happiness in it, right? I mean, this is why DPR keep corrupting and keep increasing their salary because they are more happy. They don't really care about people that they like them. This is why Israel keeps on, violating Gaza's violating Gaza's people because they feel like, oh, you know what, Torah told me to win, and this is how I win. Ha ha ha. Right? So this is the exact level of how majorities will keep on oppressing minorities if you have this kind of narrative. But secondly, minority within the minority itself. The problem will exist in social movement when the unaffected minority, for example, like the gay and the rich people that is not affected by all of the hate coming from Republican, won't help the others, the LGBTQ plus community who is in need of capital and community to make a change. And you have to understand, this also happens in Indonesia demonstration lately, where you see some diaspora and people that are rich don't even voice out what is happening in the DPR, and they're literally tone deaf, and that's very fucked up. So they don't really care about politics based on their privilege. This is exactly where rich people that have this kind of narrative is worse because they're the one that can contribute much, but they don't do anything simply because they don't want to get affected, simply because they don't feel like it. They feel like, oh, insofar I'm happy, insofar that I can F1 in Singapore, I'm happy. I don't really care about how grassroots people have to protest. So what does everything prove to you? This proves to you how the narrative that's impacting people on the grassroots is bad because it traps people in the capital structure, especially for the poor people, and it defeats the social movement because the rich won't help by giving capital to every of this movement. By that, we know that it's bad CG.
Thank you very much, member of government, for that speech. Let's welcome the member of opposition to respond. You're here.
Check, am I audible?
Audible.
Hello. Am I audible? Halo.
Yeah.
BTW suara internetku tuh agak jelek. Jadi coba aku baca emosinya dulu and anyone can confirm is it clear or not? Or yeah, just what I said before, is it clear?
It's clear.
Okay. Yep.
Sorry, member of opposition, are you speaking?
Oh, no. Bentar. Saya tamar dulu, wait.
Okay.
Okay, POI, just unmuting yourself, gender pronoun she or him. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Saya believe the way you prioritize self-love or the way you collectivism, every single feeling of people is valid. The time when you choose to prioritize yourself or the time when you choose to sacrifice anything for your girlfriend, we say as long as it's within your interest and giving more happiness for you, I think it's something that are valid and need to be the validation. We say the debate not talking about does the prioritize is something that good or not, but rather than how the dominant is need to be opposed. For example, how people reaction and how the active action can be manifested. This is the burden of the motion that never being touched by all the three benches. If I can prove to you the comparative what happened in CO, the time when we giving more active support to this dominant narrative is giving more option to people to opt in every single happiness that they wanted to do, either try to self-love or either to be someone who are collective, I think should win this debate. But several respond into OG first. Two things that OG want to bring. First, they say that, oh, is it valid because there is existence of emotional bond, for example? But second, the self-love is something very harmful. People don't want to sacrifice or something similar those lines. To respond, I don't get any explanation why then those emotional bond is something that at the end something that's very important to do so. Because we believe the most important thing is on how the agency of individual can be manifested manifested. Regardless you have emotional bond or not, but the time you can happy for those kind of circumstances is something totally okay. Because we say even fulfillment that exists in the very first place is also your happiness. Means that the people who try to fulfill their self-love will always seeking their fulfillment anyway. So we say something that are never likely to do so. Second, they're talking about dominant narrative force you to do something or something similar to this line. Does it accessible? I think the comparative, I will prove to you why then the accessibility will be there. CG, they say that they want to be balanced, but there is no any explanation how they can balance the narrative of love. But second, they say that the self-love will be manifested in the grassroots is something very bad. We say it's not something that's exclusive because the way collectivism exists for so long time that happened in society, giving more exploitation, for example, under the sake of standardization of society, for example. We say this exploitation will include there. I appreciate in the explanation on why something giving very important, giving more secure, for example, like internal happiness, but without the explanation question is simple. The scale of benefit of OOO, does it really important or not? My other responses will be integrated on my speech. What I'm going to talk to you? I will prove to you the urgency to support this dominant narrative of self-love. Second of all, I will give you the comparative widen the status quo to trying to oppose this kind of thing is something that is very problematic. Let's jump to the first one. Why the urgency is something very important. I appreciate the portrayal of OG talking about the dominant will be manifested onto a lot of discussion, social media, or something similar those lines. But the question is simple. Why those dominant are arise at the very begin with? We say the reason why it happened because there's a strong basis of collectivism that exists in society. We're talking standardization in people in desa, for example. That's very hard to follow, for example, because you need to fulfill every single standardization that's very it is outweigh your capacity. You need to ready 24 hours, for example, the time when you're tetangga, some sort of problem or something similar to those lines. This is how CO believe that support this dominant narrative is something that very important because the dominant narrative of self-love don't yet have a strong basis in society. But why it's urgent? 3 points of analysis. The time when you support this dominant narrative, basing more discussion or social media involvement means that you're giving more sense of validation into the people. Because we say it is creating the strong basis of collectivism in society, creating people to afraid to opt in to try the self-love themselves, for example. We said time when we support, we give actively support to those people that you are not alone, for example, if you want to be self-love, for example, you are not alone if you are trying to against the collectivism that exists in your circumstances or echo chamber, for example. We say sense of validation is something very important for anyone, people, because you can't giving the standardization that people can have the capacity to fulfilling all this collectivism. We're talking the people like disabled, or we are talking the people who are poor, for example, who cannot pay iuran tetangga or something similar on this line. We say this they're the one who are very important to be protected. But second, we say in status quo there is ton of demonizing of the narrative that arise. We say the demonization action of self-love are always action by the conservatism, by prejudice like you are someone who are egoistic, for example. You are someone orang serawung di desa, for example. We say all those narrative try to invalidation your feeling at the end of the day. We say something very harmful because they're creating more standardization toward the society. We say those two analysis is important because inside of CO, we giving people any choice that you want to do, for example. If you want to self-love or not, it's something that totally okay. It's your decision. Every single people feeling is valid, for example. When you want to become the self-love, we provide the dominant narrative that validate your feeling. If you don't want to do self-love and choose to collectivism, the strong basis that exists in society is access to support you, for example. We say every single people will be manifested. But why this explanation is important? It is important to think. Certainty of benefit, regardless the output at the end of the day, do you want to happy or not? At least you have choice to opt in into what you feeling for this at the end of the day. We say the agency of people is something that's very important. But second, the prerequisite for every single benefit given by opening debate, mechanizing how those people will have the capacity to do self-love or try to collectivism or something similar. This explanation happened in CO. But what is the comparative? narrative. The comparative is what happened in government bands. You will opposing this dominant narrative. It means that there will be more demonizing that bigger the self-love is something that bad. For example, like what explanation given by OG or CG, for example, it will manifest into a coercive individual to try to doing self-love, for example, not to do those kind of thing by saying that some those kind of thing is something bad, for example, and try to coercive some sort of standardization to be someone need to be, yeah, you need to do more with people or something similar those lines. We say this condition is bad, but how are you using those explanation? Two things: A, we can give more protection to the most vulnerable actor because you will have the choice. It is sweet for yourself, but second, the certainty of benefit, very proud.
Thank you very much, member of opposition, for that speech. Let's welcome the government whip to close the government bench. Here. Right, thank you very much, government whip. Last but not least, let's welcome opposition whip to the floor. Here.
Hey, am I audible?
Yeah, audible.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let's make wait. Aku belum set timerku. Maaf banget. Sorry. Yeah, everything that I say later on is just for debating purpose only. Starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Let me clarify something in this debate. This House opposite motion means that the narrative is already happening in the status quo. So the question is not whether or not the self-love narrative is good or bad, but rather first, do we need to continue to support this dominant narrative? Or second, the benefit is not upon when the narrative is already been fulfilled and implemented in the status quo, but it's also a valid benefit in the process of supporting this narrative, what will give benefit in the status quo. This is the main distinction between CO and OO, because I do agree that they give a very wonderful explanation as to why self-love is good and why this give benefit, like decreases the burden of individual about emotional fulfillment and lesser expectation in daily human interaction is great. But the question that they never answer is as to why we have to continue to support it, and why when we support it, the benefit will definitely trickle down to those kind of minority. So we already over the OO, because the benefit of OO is contingent of how the benefit of supporting it looks like, that Ilham already proved to you later on. Earlier. Ilham already proved to you why the current context of the world right now is so toxic towards people who believe in individualistic value for several reasons. First, the narrative about collectivism that happened in the status quo is already been internalized since you are born through family, religion, education, and so ever. So it stick to your mind. Even there's a dominant narrative about individualism and self-love. But secondly, then the current trend of dominant narrative in the status quo, it's still new because since 2019 in COVID, for example, digitalization whatsoever, and it's very fragile because there's still a resistance from conservative society. So what I want to say here is they're really engaging towards the government of the House. There's still an urgency for us to continually support this narrative of self-love, even if it already dominates the status quo. I will explain CG first before opening up government. CG said that this manifestation is giving irrationality to this younger generation and exploiting them. First, I think no, because younger generation also have the rationality since the very get-go. I think all financial thingy in the status quo is also accessible, how to manage you financially can be accessible. Even the school is not limited towards the conservative people in the world. So those Gen Z also can learn in the status quo. But secondly, this is symmetrical on both sides of the house, because it's also seen is Charlie Kidd, for example, or Donald Trump trying to sell the product and promote trade war, for example. This also happened in collectivism. So I don't think why the harm is exclusive in our side of the house. But thirdly, then let's answer government by saying that how people will get this benefit of validation. Because exactly when we continue to support it, this will circulate in the status quo, and there will be discussion about it. Like with social media, it's okay for mom to be selfish, for example. This is open to the people in the ground and the people in the very vulnerable act of the status quo in the side. I still do not get as to why their goal about making everything in balance is gonna be happen, because like Ilham said, more of human history, idea of individuality and self is treated as feminine and recessive. So if we are continue to support it, this will gonna die given the context of raising conservative in the status quo, like Donald Trump and Prabowo Subianto, for example. So option not gonna happen in this status quo because the power struggle between those two are comparatively lesser and comparatively favorable towards the conservative and collectivism value that's happening. So do not buy their case. Option always happen in the status quo because if we support it continuously and support it dominantly, this will counterbalance the dominant narrative of collectivism that already happened anyway in the past, for example, and giving the resistance towards it. But let's engage to the opening government. They said that they will give prizes to individualism and give a counterbalance to the dominant narrative about liberty that exists in the status quo. First, no, it's not true because, like I said earlier, this current draft of dominant narrative in the status quo is still new. There are no theft. There are threats from the conservative status quo to devalue this kind of narrative in the status quo. First, this looks like Indonesia, for example, when there are mass demonstrations. Prabowo Subianto said that you have to sacrifice your own personal space in order for Indonesia emas 2024, for example. But secondly, then, or Donald Trump, that abortion is something that unjustified because that mother have to sacrifice to their children. This is framed out to you, judges, that this narrative about collectivism in the status quo, it still exists and it's growing given the context of this given the context of self-love narrative. It's still dominant, it's still there. But there are sponsored action to prolong this narrative about collectivism to against the individualism and self-love. This is even worse when you know this context of collectivism narrative is often portrayed to oppressive minority, women, and children. Exactly from the argumentation that coming from Deputy Prime Minister. Because I would say the reason as to why feminism is being treated harshly in Trump administration is because against the conservative value of standard American family that prioritizes sacrifices for your family other than your self-love. This is a better than OO because all stop on explaining this narrative takes the agency. But we explain to you. Moreover, this is worse because this is not just take the agency, but gaslighting those kind of individual and put the blame of this vulnerable act of the status quo. We crystallize the harm in opening opposition. But secondly, then let's bite the bullets then and admit that that will make individualism so much stronger in the status quo. Yada yada yada. I will prove to you why this is still justified and you need to be supported. And this narrative of self-love, it still needs to be supported since the very get-go. Why is it justified and we need to support it in the status quo? Likely for several reasons. First, you've never been asked to be born in the very first place and you're born alone. So I don't know why being individualistic alone is something that bad given the context you are being alone in your entire life. But secondly, that this is worsened, especially in the current context of capitalistic growth, for example. And people use, even if they're collective, for example, they are still pragmatic judges. You cannot give expectation for people to help you because everyone is already minding their own business, for example. So even in their side of the house, you cannot guarantee people will help you if you sacrifice either because exactly homo homini lupus. So I think at least the harm is symmetrical in both sides of the house. In our side, it's comparatively better because we give option and validation towards the Kama community that's already been suffering for decades the status quo. But tell me then, the idea of meaningful interaction in DPM, but this will make human interaction become more and more pragmatic and not its meaning. First, the meaning of interaction is not by narrative. Even if there are already individuals narrative in the status quo, you still lost your parent, doesn't it? But secondly, that is untrue because in the context of some people prioritizing self-love, they're not losing like empathy. Empathy and self-love is different. Empathy is internalized in religion and religion is still interested in yourself. Even better because you also know what you get and you also know what you have to give. But you know what are set by standard. We flip this by saying that the narrative of collectivism is the status quo is used to for what? To discriminate other people in the status quo, to give them an equal burden and an equal job, for example. Low wages for teacher. Why? It is sacrifice, for example. This is exactly collectivism narrative that exists in the government of the house. So the way is very simple. On three things. First, we closing government and closing opposition prove to you why this is something that's very important and protecting the most vulnerable after the status quo that's already been discriminated since the very get-go. But secondly, then we'll also prove to you that the practice of benefiting all aturan because all stop understanding the benefit is individual level, we prove to you this will be manifest in the status quo. But tell you then, we are already engaging in the very worst case scenario. Even if the benefit is not happen, why? But by just supporting this dominant narrative alone, it's still something that very proud to oppose.